It works. Hello, everyone. I'm really glad to welcome you today for a session on climate accountability in the era of AI, with the exploration of the role of global standards. I'm Lina Ismail from AFNOR, which is a French standardization association, and I welcome you all to attend this event. So, as a matter of introduction, just a couple of words. I think that everyone knows about artificial intelligence boom, but with the revolution of AI, we have also environmental impact that we need to consider and we need to assess and to measure also. This makes one question absolutely central. How do we ensure that the AI technologies grow in a way that it is aligned with our climate and sustainability goals? So today we will explore what sustainable AI really means. How can we measure the environmental impact of AI, and why international standards are actually part of the solution, and how international cooperation is actually key in order to tackle the environmental issues in that specific field. To open our discussion, I'm very pleased to welcome three speakers for the opening remarks. First of all, it's my honor to give the floor to Diane Simieux, Director for Climate, Energy Efficiency and Air Quality at the Ecological Transition Ministry in France.
Okay. Thank you, Lina, and thank you, everyone. It's a great honor to welcome such a great group of partners from academia, from other countries, governments, private sectors, and with sharing one objective, which is the developing of an AI in line with our climate commitments. And I'd like to focus on two key prerequisites to achieve this objective. The first one is good international cooperation, and the second one is good international standards. So I'll focus on the first one, good international cooperation. So getting an AI that is sustainable as well as inclusive, ethical, and safe isn't just going to happen by itself. This will need strong international cooperation with a number of partners. And so COPs, we're at COPs. COPs are all about international collaboration, right? And this COP session has shown that the topic is on everyone's mind. There was a high-level roundtable, which was great, organized by the International Telecommunication Union at the beginning of the week, and more than a dozen of side events organized by various stakeholders up to now. So 10 months ago, France had the honor of welcoming countries and stakeholders from all across the globe at the AI Action Summit in Paris. And there, President Macron launched with the International Telecommunication Union and UNEP, as well as 90 founding members, including members from India, from NVIDIA, from Schneider Electric, who are here with us today, the Coalition for Sustainable AI. It's a community gathering the manufacturers, the AI providers and clients, researchers, and environmental specialists to advance the science, the standards, and the solution. So the coalition, 10 months in, has already generated key deliverables such as measurement method and AI use cases for the environment. An important milestone has been reached with the establishment in August by the United Nations General Assembly of the Independent International Scientific Panel on Artificial Intelligence and the Global Dialogue on Artificial Intelligence Governance. And I'm very proud to announce today that the Coalition for Sustainable AI is gaining momentum. We already have over 200 members today. And today we're welcoming a very special new partner. ISO is joining so that we can count on their expertise and support to develop new standards for the AI and environment. And so this leads me to the second key prerequisite for developing sustainable AI, and those are good international standards. So Sergio will cover the importance of standards, but I would like to bring in the point of view from policymakers. Our public policies, they rely on data, on facts, and to gather the data and facts that will be useful for anticipating new infrastructures, new regulation, new funding, we need to trust the data, and we need to be sure that we can aggregate data from various stakeholders. And for that, we need standards, because if everyone counts in a different way and reports in a different way, then policymakers such as myself are lost, and we don't know how to draft the policy if we're lost. And to make, as we expand AI capabilities, we must first establish a very clear baseline, understanding the energy and resource demands of our AI system to allow us to measure, track, incentivize improvements over time. Data and the standards that underpin it are the foundation of these efforts. So France has been deeply involved in the advancement of these standards in the last months. At the AI Action Summit, we gathered experts from ISO, ITU, and IEEE to share a common roadmap on the development of those standards. And since then, we've been involved to advance those standards with partners such as Google, Mistral, NVIDIA, or Schneider Electric, who are with us today, and who will share their vision. And I would like to really thank all of these partners for their leadership. And ultimately, our goal is clear. A more resilient and efficient AI is an AI that benefits all of us, no matter where we live. Thank you for your attention. Sergio, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all of you. Let me start by thanking France and our member in France, AFNOR, for your leadership since our organization was created in 1947. You were there, not you personally, but AFNOR was there, of course. And you've been with us through all this journey with a very strong participation and commitment in the governance of the organization, as well as in our technical activities. I also want to thank you for organizing this session that I find extremely relevant. Everything we've been listening to during this week has been about two main things. Number one is implementation and impact, because we cannot longer wait to produce the change that we are committed to produce. And the second one is about partnership. We cannot longer work in isolation, in silos. So we need to combine our talents, work together to achieve the impact that we have promised. So this brings me to AI in particular. And it's truly, AI is not an evolution, it's a revolution. Let me just share with you some numbers. It took 16 years to the world to achieve 100 million users for cell phones. It took 7 years to achieve 100 million users for the internet. For ChatGPT, how long do you think it took? 3 months. 3 months to achieve 100 million users. So that is the rate of acceleration, and it's very difficult to cope with that, especially for us. Creating standards is not something that happened overnight, right? And the second element to mention about AI is that there is a huge power of impact, both in the positive and in the negative. In the positive, it's about acceleration. If we're talking about climate action, that we need to deliver impact soon, well, AI can really be a huge lever for us to achieve that objective. But on the dark side, if you will, it can also be part of the problem. And we know that it can be a huge environmental and carbon footprint, but also related to the good governance of AI, which is still a question mark in many, many dimensions. And in this dilemma is where I think international standards can help, and they can help a lot. First, with the existing portfolio we already have, and we're very proud of that. One of the key messages for you today, please do not reinvent the wheel. Use the standard that already exists and have been co-created, co-developed with our sister organization, the IEC. We have a lot in the horizontal. We have the first management standard on AI, but we also have a lot, and we need to do even more on that, on the verticals. How do we use AI in the healthcare area or in automotive and so much more? That's about standard themselves. And the second area where I think we can help is with our strong commitment to partnership. And that brings me to your point, to ISO formally announcing that we joined this coalition for sustainable AI. We're so proud to be part of that collective effort with 200 organizations. And also with our response to the call from the United Nations to organize an AI Standards Summit. This is one area where we cannot afford creating confusion, overlapping, or fragmentation standards to deal with the challenges and opportunities of AI. That's why, together with the IEC and with the ITU, we have organized this AI Summit that will be held in Korea on the 2nd and the 3rd of December, where we will bring together experts from the standardization side, of course, but also industry, policymakers, regulators, with a view to creating practical solutions to address the challenges about AI. So thanks again for your attention. I wish you all the best in this important session. Thank you. Yeah, I give the floor to my friend, Vimal.
Thank you, Sergio. Actually, whatever I was going to say, Sergio has already said, so just copy-paste, okay? So that's what real partnerships are. And especially I want to mention the last point you made on AI Standards Summit, which IEC, ISO, and ITU are jointly hosting in Seoul in the beginning of December. I think that's a pivotal event that we are doing every year. I think this is what the world really needs. And this is actually SDG 17 in action. SDG 17 partnerships, that's what the world needs. By way of a quick introduction, my name is Vimal Mahendru. I'm originally from India. I've been part of the IEC community for last 12 years. I chair the board for standards and standardization activities, and I also have the privilege of being the special envoy for UN SDGs. This brings me to these forums like COP for two reasons. The most important is to listen and learn from whatever the global community is saying. We are normally a bunch of engineers who are very good and comfortable on our computers, looking at electrons and circuits and diagrams. But coming here is not only humbling, but also energizing, because we get to learn what the world is really expecting of us. We are great at writing standards, but standards on what? At what is answered when we come here? What I've been hearing this time is tripling of renewables, doubling of energy efficiency. Now, how do you deliver doubling of energy efficiency? And this is where I find electrification across use cases is taking place. Really, what I am amazed at is in every pavilion there is a conversation around energy efficiency. Nobody is talking about use less fossil fuel and that will be energy efficient. People are talking about converting from fossil fuel based economies to electrified communities. One reason for that, and it's not rocket science, the moment you go from a diesel generator to an electrified system, that in itself inherently creates energy efficiency. Because electricity, the moment you have electrons, you can stop, store, manage, sense, you can switch on, switch off, do many things. Once you have a diesel generator, it just goes on and on and on till you switch it off. And when you switch it off, it switches off. That's it. So I think this kind of change is at the heart of the evolving world. IEC is clearly pivoting itself towards standards for an all-electric and connected society. We believe, we are convinced that the future is totally electric. The moment we are going electric, it lends itself very naturally to the evolving world where there is connectivity of everything. Each one of us carries a mobile phone in our pocket. Today, this is actually our lifeline because I don't have any currency notes or Brazilian currency or Swiss francs in my pocket. I pay everywhere over here, including for the Uber and the restaurant, using my mobile phone. A mobile phone works because there are about 100 IEC standards that are embedded. I should say IEC and ISO standards embedded in it because we jointly manage the standardization work around electronics, software, AI, etc. With this, welcome to this session. I'm looking forward to our partners working with us. This is, as I said, SDG 17 in action. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Lina.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. We will now continue the conversation after those opening remarks with our panel. So for the next 35 minutes, we will explore three themes. First of all, the understanding of the environmental impact of AI, then the identification of the levers to actually build the sustainable AI and what does it mean. And thirdly, the discussion on how global governance and standards could actually bring some coherence to these efforts. So it's my pleasure to welcome on the stage our panelists. So first of all, Josh Parker, Head of Sustainability at NVIDIA. Reina Ubeda from ITU Study Group 5 on sustainability. Martin Kroes, the Director of the Climate Change Division at UNEP. Esther Finidori, Chief Sustainability Officer of Schneider. And David Dow, co-founder of Gain Forest and on behalf of Climate Change AI. Thank you very much. And I will grab myself a seat. That's perfect. It's a big panel for a big topic, so that's why it's a little bit crowded. So first of all, in order to deep dive into the conversation, for Martin, I would like to ask you what are the most pressing environmental risks linked to AI development from your perspective, and what are the main blind spots in measuring the environmental impact of AI today? And maybe I will leave the mic to you.
Yeah, this one works, right? Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction, for the speeches, and for being part also of this panel here. When we talk environmental risks in the context of AI, the first thing that comes to our mind is energy use, data centers. You know, the growing demand for energy is driven by two things, actually: air conditioning and data centers. It's interesting, you know, talking about air conditioning here right now. But the International Energy Agency has done the studies. The demand for electricity over the next 5, 10, 15 years will be driven by the need for air conditioning because of extreme heat that comes with climate change and data centers. And there is a link to AI. How are we going to power those data centers, right? If we power them with fossil energy, then we are creating more of that problem that we are already facing. So this is one of these big environmental risks, climate-associated risks when it comes to AI. We need to make sure that data centers are being powered by non-fossil fuel sources, by renewable energy. If not, we are just creating more problems for ourselves. So that is really something that I think we need to keep in our
in um, in our minds and pay attention to. The other one, just briefly, blind spots you were asking also, you know, and that in my view is you know, the AI hardware requires materials of extreme purity. And so mineral extraction, semiconductor manufacturing, and the supply chains that are associated with that are not very well understood, are not very well researched. We don't know what damage we are creating along that supply chain, and that is kind of a blind spot, I think, that we need to pay more attention to. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Holding up to you, David, from a scientific perspective, how can we really assess the environmental footprint of AI? And can we assess everything, actually? And my third question will be, what is the proportion with the famous rebound effects?
Thank you for bringing in also the academic perspective into this really important discussion. We all know that we are in the midst of a very fast progress of scientific innovation, and oftentimes it's really difficult for policy to keep up. So one urge I have for the panelists is to always consider scientific input into it. We've seen this, for example, in the EU AI Act, that there was a line about reducing or fixing the size of the model parameters of the model as dangerous or not. But if you ask a scientist, of AI researcher, he can tell you it's not about the model parameters. It's about the training data and the way it's trained. So now it's really hard to fix this line because policy is slow to change, right? So keep in mind that what we are discussing here is different next month and next month. So this is the first statement. The second statement I want to bring in is we're talking a lot about AI's environmental impact in terms of energy use, which I absolutely agree we need to be considerate. But AI is not AI. We're talking about large language models, which are heavy in energy use, that are using the electricity of large cities. But there are also small models, like convolutional neural networks, that can be used in a very energy efficient, almost like a small Raspberry Pi computer, that, for example, local communities in the Amazon are right now using to predict where deforestation is, so they can reduce their fossil fuel use when it comes to using a boat to go to the right places, right? So what I'm arguing for, a second perspective, is not just the negative carbon impact of AI, but also the positive carbon impact that AI potentially has. And then take this into consideration when designing standards. So incentivizing almost like a net zero for AI development. And I think what's really important, the rebound effect you mentioned, is an effect that scientifically we can only estimate when we collect data. So when we deploy these processes, I urge policymakers to also think about data collection infrastructure, impact measurement infrastructure of potential downstream impacts of these policies or these developments, so we can measure, analyze these rebound effects potentially, and adjust very quickly on changes. So summa summarum, make sure to talk to your local scientist.
Thank you very much. And I would like now to hear the company and businesses' perspective on that, because they are at the front line of the demand of AI and its application, which have exploded in the recent years. This AI revolution has actually disrupted the entire value chain. So from Schneider Electric point of view, what changes do you see, and how are you addressing the sustainability challenge?
Hi everyone. Just for everyone to set the scene and for everyone to understand, so Schneider Electric, we're an equipment manufacturer. We manufacture electrical architecture, cooling systems, and we do sell a lot of the equipment that go into a data center. So that's the position we're talking from. You know, when I reflect on the question of standards, accountability, and AI, there are a few things I want to say. First, I think there's a confusion or a risk of confusion between what standards can achieve. The first thing standards will help us do is to better measure. And there's a need for that. Today, we basically only measure PUE, it's not good enough anymore. Right now we're working with our large data centers company to measure the embodied carbon, the impact of the build of the data center. And for the data center operation, we can probably measure other things like water consumption. We can probably as well measure the computing need and the energy consumption per terabyte, for instance, of computing power. So there's a need to better measure. Where I want us to be all careful is that standards can also help support policy to do legislation. And here it's a very different story, because we don't need policy to focus on what data centers we do anyway. And they know that data center operator, they know that they consume energy. This is a massive piece of their cost structure. So what we want policy underpinned by standards to do is to influence the design and the operation that will not be done by the industry in a way that will not prevent innovation. So let me tell you, give you an example. Energy efficiency of data centers, you need to measure, but the operators will do it because it's a massive competitiveness issue. How do data centers contribute to the load? Are a fair player in load management? They might not do alone because this is more complicated and nothing compels them to do that. It's not at all about efficiency. It's about load management. And there maybe policy can help design data centers slightly differently. So the type of standards you want to build if you're focusing on policy design are in fact, I think, very different from the type of standards we're going to build, and we need both, to better measure, report on performance. Last comment, and I think NVIDIA will comment on that as well. My impression, and I'm not a data center operator, neither an AI company, is that we're right now in a deep innovation period. And honestly, even the main players, they're not really sure where they're going to land. They don't know what their technology will look like in 5 years. We need to be careful in the way we both design standards, which is of course a very long process, as well as policy, that we do not regulate too fast, or we do not standardize too fast, or we find a way to be more agile than usual. Because when you have deep innovation going on, poor legislation and poor standards, but I think it's more legislation topic, in fact, is the best way either to kill innovation or to keep those players away from your markets. So this is a moment where it's not just about consulting and listening to those players, they don't have the answer either. So we need to accommodate for that flexibility and have that conversation in some cases maybe in 5 years.
Actually, it was for you, Josh. We really want to know more about what NVIDIA has in mind when it comes to addressing the sustainability challenge, because you're also at the core of the AI value chain.
Thanks, and thank you again for the invitation here. I'm really excited to talk about this topic. The first thing I'll mention is to reiterate what David mentioned about the pace of innovation. And this creates huge challenges when it comes to standardization or any kind of metrics, because if what you're measuring has to change every year or even every few months because the ecosystem is evolving that fast, it makes it much more difficult, and as Esther was saying, potentially much more risky, because you may end up measuring the wrong thing and creating the incentives that push the industry not only in an economically bad position, but also potentially in an unsustainable position. Things like PUE are an example of that. So the thing that we need to focus on more than anything is what, again, as Esther mentioned, what is the market not already doing? Energy efficiency is something that's happening very quickly. In the past 1 generation of our platform at NVIDIA, we've improved the energy efficiency for a given AI inference workload by 30 times. So that's a 97% reduction in the energy for the exact same workload in just 2 years. So that energy efficiency is something that the market is already addressing. Now, when it comes to transparency, so what can we measure if we want to have more transparency? We talked about embodied emissions, and I think ultimately we want to focus on where can we have the biggest impact. And I'm happy to say that NVIDIA, just this year, we started releasing product carbon footprints for our GPUs. These are available on our website if anybody wants to see. They're cradle to gate, so you can see the manufacturing-related emissions for our products. And this is our first step to say, okay, let's share what data we have so that we can quantify it. And it's true that if you look across the life cycle, the vast majority of the emissions are in the downstream use. so the energy associated with the data center operation. So that's one of the reasons why we're focused on energy efficiency. That's where the biggest impacts are. And then we've got the data transparency around upstream as well. And the last comment I'll make is it is important to put this in perspective. So again, we're at COP. We're trying to focus on climate change generally. If you look at data centers and you say, hey, the footprint is growing because AI is growing, you might get worried about that. But if you zoom out and you say, what's happening across the world more generally, it becomes a little bit better of a picture. The IEA estimated the data centers in 2024 used 1.5% of global electricity, and AI is a fraction of that, 1.5%. So even though it's growing rapidly, it's still a very small proportion of overall energy, and going forward, it's going to grow, but we're still starting from a small baseline, and there's huge promise in what AI can do for us across industries to help solve climate.
Thank you very much. And I think that the idea of transparency and sharing the data also is very important for all the value chain of AI, so that everyone in the end could be able to actually assess and measure the environmental footprint of AI. On sustainable AI itself and the Coalition for Sustainable AI, we had a presentation from the French Ministry, who's also at the core of this coalition as ITU also. So for you, Reina, as one of the co-founders of this coalition, how could you define sustainable AI, and is it mainly like a technical concept or ethical or governance concept? Could you tell us more about that on behalf of the coalition?
Thank you so much, Lina, and thank you for inviting me. For us, for ITU, we are very proud of being part of this coalition because we are the specialized agency of the UN on digital tech. But we are also a standards development organization. So it was a very honor to be with the French Ministry and UNEP, part of this co-founder. How do we see sustainable AI? We are not referring to just one of the dimensions. It is fundamentally a three-part concept when we talk about environment, when we talk about economic, but we also talk about the part of social and cultural. And also, it's not just from the technical point of view, but because from the technical point of view, you need energy efficient and environmental responsible across the entire life cycle. And this is one part that the coalition is looking for. From that part, as ITU, that's why we are very proud of being in this coalition, because we work on the standards, on the backbone standards. Right now, our previous colleagues were talking about data centers, so we are working on the requirements for green data center, but not only, but also on the cooling solutions. You were talking about air conditioning. How can we cool the different data centers? And also this will depend on the region, right? Because then if you are building a data center in a very hot region, how can you adequate the temperature there? So that's why also standards are needed, because we need the necessary requirements. And that is why also the standards cannot be just focused on one region or focus on the industry. It has to be worldwide. That's why we are calling also for this, for the coalition, but also for the collaboration that there is between the different standards development organization as ISO, IEC, but also IEEE, ETSI, that are working on this aspect. And just to conclude on this part, is recently, last week, we have achieved the first step of approval of a standard that is how to measure the AI environmental impact from the whole life cycle. And there were key players participating in the development of the standard. There was France, but there was operators as Orange, Huawei, Nokia, Ericsson, and also big players as Google. There was collaboration from Mistral. So we hope that this standard can provide a good step in order to measure this. And what we want to do is also to test it, to collect examples how the standard will be implemented. Thank you.
Sorry. Regarding the international scale, you were saying that we are beginning to see some new standards that are actually paving the way for the assessment of environmental impact of AI. I wanted to ask a question for you, Martin. What are the regulatory issues at stake, and what could be the benefits for the countries and the international organization, of course, who are working towards a more sustainable AI system and services?
Thank you very much. So from our perspective, setting international standards based on data, on cooperation, is not to over-regulate or to regulate to death an industry that is just emerging. This is not, I think, what anybody has in mind. We need to give the space, as you have said, to the industry to evolve and not to suppress it with setting standards, before the industry is actually has taken off. So, but, submitting data through international cooperation, through the coalition that you have mentioned, submitting data, making it comparable across the industry, looking at the environmental footprint, the climatic footprint of AI, these are all very important issues. We cannot regulate what we cannot measure. Nobody wants to regulate, right? But we need to be aware, what are those footprints? What is the water footprint, for example? Not talking about emissions now. We don't know. So policymakers, they need to understand and know what AI's environmental footprint, water footprint, emission footprint actually is, so that yes, just one moment. So that is the basis. This is what we are talking about here, that we have some kind of international cooperation on data, on setting standards to compare across countries, across industries. That's what we are talking about. We are not talking about standards that make it impossible for the industry to flourish. Thank you.
But it is really not what I said, so I just want to re-say what I said, because obviously I haven't been clear. You need standards to count and report. You can report your investors, you can report your customers. So by the way, you need both corporate level standard, aggregating the whole footprints. You need offer level standards, if that's feasible. I don't think it is right now, but to be able to put that in your customer, in your sales pitch, you need those. What I said is that to regulate, you need a different type of standard. If you start from the regulator's objective right now, honestly, probably shouldn't be energy efficiency, but load management is super important. The role those data centers is going to play when they're plugged in the grid, this one is a different type of standards. And this type of standard we need, and we want that in regulation. My point is, let's not confuse the type of standards we'll use where, because they call for very different, of course, contents. It's really not the same thing. And we also need those standards that will be useful to legislation to point the actors to things they would not do anyway. And that's where I think energy efficiency is probably not a priority, but to be discussed. They're not the same standards, but then you need more standards. If you go all the way to what I've just said, they're just not the same. And often we confuse, right? As soon as we have a standard, we want to regulate against it. You see the point? And that's not your responsibility. It's not the responsibility of the standardization community. We all know it's going to happen. So you also need to think about that when you design what you want to standardize. Am I being clearer now?
I just wanted to add something to, because this week we have been discussing about standards a lot, about AI, and one of the things that is important, you mentioned it at your first part, that standards are a policy tool, but we have to also help the governments. Capacity building is missing. Sometimes government representatives, they don't know where these standards are, or they don't know how to use them. So this is also a part that is very much needed. And as part of the work that we are doing in the coalition, also in ITU, when the Green Digital Action, is also to raise awareness. So they know, of course, there are more standards that are needed because technology evolves, but also there are standards that are there that people, they don't know that exist, or they don't know how to use. So I think this is also another issue that we should see. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yes, we can see that standards and regulation are very in the core of this discussion. I wanted to have a small focus on the solutions that are already existing for AI stakeholders to actually begin to count the environmental impact of AI, and about the fact that are we really ready to disclose environmental indicators throughout the value chain also? So maybe going back to you, Josh, regarding the solution that we may have today, except for standards, if there's other solutions that you could think of when it comes to assessing environmental impact of AI.
It is difficult because, as I mentioned, the evolution, the innovation is so rapid, it's hard to get your arms around it. So what I mentioned before, product carbon footprints, where we're going cradle to gate, we're measuring the actual impacts during manufacturing. That's useful, that's the first step. And you can do the same thing with data centers. You can count how much water is being used, how much energy is being used, and calculate the emissions. But the tricky part is, how do you normalize that? Because if a data center, say a modern data center, is deploying AI, it may use a lot of energy. It'll use less water than it used to because of new direct-to-chip liquid cooling. But you look at that energy and you say, okay, what are we getting for that? And if what you're getting out of the data center is 10 times better than what you're getting from the data center down the street that uses half as much energy, then you need to account for that in the metrics. So. And that's the challenging thing about AI, is finding the output that you can compare apples to apples. So that's the challenge. That's where, maybe standards looking at hardware, say on a flops per capacity basis that's normalized to bit length. That may be a way to narrowly look at the performance and the energy efficiency of the hardware, but looking across the ecosystem, it's really challenging. At the end of the day, though, if our goal around the standardization and the metrics and all of this conversation is to drive sustainable AI, the best thing we can do to drive sustainable AI is to use current gen platforms and hardware. I mentioned 30 times improvement in energy efficiency in one generation. We've also improved the water efficiency by 300 times by the transition from air cooling to direct-to-chip liquid cooling. So in the past 1 year, we've become 300 times more water efficient. So whatever you were using a year or two ago, even if it was the most energy efficient, water efficient system at the time, what we're doing now is just light years ahead of it. So that pace of innovation is likely to continue. So for the foreseeable future, the best thing we can do is to allow development, to drive development towards current gen hardware and platforms.
Thank you very much. And for you at Climate Change AI, we hear a lot about the innovation and also from a scientific perspective. What is your ideas regarding environmental indicator to disclose when it comes to the assessment of environmental impact of AI?
So maybe to also give a sentence on climate change AI. Climate change AI came from the academic community, initially with a big paper called How to Tackle Climate Change with AI that was heavily cited. We are home in the academic conferences like NeurIPS and ICML, where the AI development happens at first hand. And so we are trying to influence a lot of AI researchers thinking on environmental topics to even enable that thinking of, okay, from first-hand principles and from the people who are really the closest to understanding the development of the technology and the science behind it, what makes sense to measure, what makes sense to report, and what makes sense to research further. And so what we've seen, first, emphasis on not just the negative impacts of AI on the environment, but also, again, the positive impacts AI potentially have. AI is already improving designs in roads, designs in traffic lights, designs in power systems itself. Google is using AI to improve it. And also in deforestation monitoring, AI is used heavily to reduce carbon footprint. So we want to also acknowledge that there's a positive accounting number that is attached to AI models that should be potentially accounted for when designing these standards. But when it comes to carbon and environmental footprint of AI models, there are several levels that Josh has already mentioned really well that you can analyze from. It can come from the moment you source the materials, like the rare materials that are damaging the environment, until the way researchers are training models. To give you an example, to train a ChatGPT-like model, we know this from Facebook because they open source the model. It takes roughly, you download the whole internet, which is surprisingly small, 10 terabytes in text, if you remove all the cat images. And then you buy 6,000 GPUs and you run them over 1 month. That is the cost of electricity of a whole town. But the problem doesn't start with this one training inference. It starts actually with the research process. Because obviously Meta, Facebook, Google, they're not running it once because they need to find the right model. So they're running this training process multiple times, right? And so that's where a lot of the training itself accumulates with intense production and need for electricity. And you need to account this when you use that model. So that's number one. Number two is that rebound effect that you mentioned. Inference is relatively cheap. One time calling ChatGPT, if you just say thank you, is like a little bit less than a Google search itself, but it becomes problematic once it scales to 100 million people, as mentioned. So the scale of inference is the scale of the users, is the impact, that environmental impact that we need to account for. So those are two different things. One is the research process that is by itself, every time you start, super intensive. The other is the inference that is cheap once, but scales with the number of users. So when you do policy making, you need to account for these two very important differences of environmental impact that is caused by two very different reasons. And so as academics, we are trying to understand what is the level of precision that is needed for policymakers and standards makers for it to be useful. And in fact, oftentimes, we don't have enough of these discussions. We academics are oftentimes sitting in our own ivory tower, and oftentimes we also feel the policymakers and the standards makers are not asking us too much. Maybe we are too nerdy for you guys, but like we would love to be more involved in the process, and we would love to figure out more research problems coming from your side so we can discover and decide, okay, what makes sense. Because let's face it, a traditional academic AI frontier researcher doesn't think all of the time about environmental impact. It's not the main focus. So we need input from the standards field, from policymakers, to even raise awareness within the academic community that that's something we need to research.
Thank you very much. And what I really like with this group here is that we try to connect different communities. And I wanted to get back to the coalition of sustainable AI with you, Reina, with maybe one of the last questions before going to the audience to see if they have some questions. How does the Coalition for Sustainable AI is actually able to connect the climate communities and the AI communities also? Because here at COP, of course, we are more into climate communities, but it's really important that those two worlds could actually work with another in order to find the solutions for more sustainable AI.
Thank you, Lina. Well, the coalition now is over 200 partners, and also the standards organization are there. So the coalition is organizing some workshops and doing some research, for example, on data center guidelines. There will be a standard meeting during the AI summit. No, it's not the AI summit, AI standard summit in Korea, sorry, that is ISO ITU and IEC. And there will be this meeting to understand what the standardization activities are doing. But this is an open meeting. It will not be just for the standard. It's also the academia is welcome. And something that was said yesterday that I like it a lot, when there was a panel yesterday, there was a representative from the indigenous community. She said, make the standards also more inclusive for us. Put us in the discussion. So the coalition helps this, because from the founders, we have a lot of members, different communities. UNEP, for example, have all the environmental community. ITU had the ICT community and the governments of France. So this is how it is important, this coalition, in order to leave no one behind, you know, to have everyone in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank warmly all of the participants of the panel for their intervention. And I would like to see in the audience if there are some questions. So I will give you the mic, and if you can present yourselves. Thanks.
Thank you all for joining and for the diverse perspectives. I'm Sasank. I have a background in AI research, and I now run a climate tech company. My question really for any of you is, obviously we've seen a division between open source and closed source in AI developments, and I'm curious, the open source models that are often released, they maybe lag behind performance of the closed source models, especially when we look at the frontier labs and also the neo labs as well that are emerging with things like world models. So I'm curious from your perspective with the coalition, as individuals too, with the work you do, what can we do to encourage more open sourcing of the latest models and especially to deploy them for sustainable development goals?
Wonderful question. I think one of the things that, so I'm German, but I'm based and live in Switzerland. And Switzerland has just released a public AI infrastructure, AI model that was trained by the country of Switzerland itself within different kind of universities. So we academics actually, I'm part of ETH Zurich, we got together, we said, we need to create alternatives towards big tech companies' models. They might not be as performant or as good as the benchmarks they are, but what we can provide as academics is we can document every single step, benchmark every single reproducibility, and provide this as a public infrastructure where we can showcase what data sets were used. And so now this model is used in Swiss politics because it speaks Swiss German pretty well. And we also connecting with local organizations within our country to have hackathons building on top of these models. So what I'm saying is there's this movement called public AI, and it's very different from open source AI. Public AI means that it's the responsibility of countries to also develop AI infrastructure, AI research, to make it open source, to push for these changes, because obviously the incentives for big tech companies oftentimes are not there to open source their technology. It's very difficult. In fact, one of the things we saw is that one of the most efficient open source models, DeepSeek, was a response to the fact that OpenAI kept it secret, and so they had to actually reinvent the wheel, and they figured out a smaller and more efficient way to develop the model that is doing reasoning. And so I think that should not be done from private industry and sectors, because we cannot rely on the long term that they maintain the infrastructure, they can plug out any time. It needs to come from countries. So heavily urged to look into the public AI movement.
I would like to compliment, and I know that's not really an answer question, but it's echoing this remark. So I know the Swiss model, and I'll tell you what I find incredible with what Switzerland has done. It's the LLM that was trained on the highest number of different languages. So it's the only true international, meaning probably less biased, or at least inclusive LLM, because the underlying data comes from over 100, I don't know how many, but a very, very large number of languages, which is very unique. So where I would like to echo, I'm not sure, or maybe there's a debate between open source and not. The debate I would like to put on the table is rather, when we think about inclusive AI, we say AI will drive disruptive innovation. We say some of the applications, only some, but some will be in the domain of climate, environment, and sustainability. How do we make those capabilities available for NGOs, entrepreneurs, everywhere in the world, not just in Europe, not just in the US, where some of money is there, but everywhere in the world. So how do we make those capabilities available, free or low cost, affordable, whatever that means, to those who will use AI capabilities to bring innovations? And those innovations, they will just change the way we operate. You were talking about LCA before. LCA, or the old world, we multiply averages, very static data. Tomorrow, data will flow, environment data will flow in the value chain. This is the type of innovation we want to put forward. And this is what I would call real inclusive AI. It's when the computing power, when the capabilities are available to those who will bring sustainable innovation to the market.
Thank you very much. We still have 2 questions before the end of the session.
Hi, my name is Kier Kühne. I'm with Lingo, the Leave It in the Ground initiative. So I come from the climate side. We figure out how to end the age of fossil fuels and move to a fully renewably powered society. And we have recently developed a fossil-free product standard to allow companies to show that their whole supply chain runs on renewable energy and there are no fossil fuels involved. There's also a possibility to show partially fossil-free products if only a part of that supply chain is fossil-free. And this also applies to digital products. So it's possible to have fossil-free digital products. And the reason I came here is because we have this vision that the internet should be fossil-free. You know, information technology should not be running on last millennium's dirty energy. And looking at you know, how clean energy is now getting increasingly cheaper than dirty energy, I'm wondering whether for AI there could be a case to say, okay, AI is the first thing that will be fully renewably powered, and to make such a pledge or get such a commitment, because you know we're worried about the growth in energy use coming via AI and data centers. You know, in the Permian, the biggest carbon bomb in the world, they're setting up data centers to use the frack gas, or some coal power plants are getting their lifetimes extended to power data centers, and AI seems to be an ingredient in that. So is there a case for saying AI could be the first human enterprise that's fully renewably powered and fossil free?
Thank you very much. And maybe we should double the question, if you can make it short so that we can have answers. Okay. Well.
No, I understand where you come from. I understand the beauty that such a commitment would hold, or the signaling. And I don't want to be, you know, what I'm going to say is subtle, so I don't want you to misunderstand me. We heard, I don't know if this data is right, but data centers maybe 1.5% of, I don't know if that was CO2 electricity demand. You don't optimize a grid at the level of 1% of the demand. You optimize the grid on the whole. You balance power on the whole. Thinking that you're going to have this subset, which is very small, where you will be 100% powered by renewable, is either going to be theoretical, let's say, paper accounting, or it would be suboptimal on the overall balance of the grid. Because by addressing a subtopic, you will create adverse effect on the rest. Again, I'm being very subtle here, so if you don't understand what I'm saying, please connect with me afterwards. You don't optimize a system addressing 1% of the load of that system. I don't think this is, honestly, the idea is beautiful, but I don't think this is the way to go.
Vimal, one last word and we need to wrap up.
I just wanted to supplement what you said. Actually, that was what I was going to say. I think we have to clarify also the role of standards bodies, the industry, and the regulators. The standards body do voluntary standards. We get a group of people, experts, who come together, they write whatever is the consensus on a particular matter, issue that needs to be addressed. The application of that standard is totally voluntary. The standards body, ISO, IEC, ITU, we cannot force anybody to. We have zero regulatory power. That remains with governments. Governments are based in sovereign entities, and so it's for India, France, Italy, Japan, every country to decide its own regulations based on what you say. As much as I personally love the beautiful idea that you're saying, as Esther also mentioned, I think the standards body, we have to give them credit. They already have the whole set of standards required. Technology exists, standards exist. We need to talk to the governments where it goes. And over there, the governments are looking at the bigger use cases, industrial electricity, for example. That's where I think the government's focus right now is. And I think maybe that's the right way to go. This is my perspective, not necessarily IEC perspective. Thank you.
It's time to wrap up. Thank you, everyone, for all of this intense conversation. I'm sure that the topic of sustainable AI and standardization is not closed, and we will continue to discuss that afterwards. So I would like to thank all of the panelists today, and also the speakers for the opening remarks. And thank you to the audience also for the smart questions. And yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.